Hi, welcome everyone. So, today I thought I'd talk about what ego is because I um I think maybe it's sometimes not so clear what ego is. So, let's get started. So, who we actually are is our, I think I've talked about this quite a bit in my previous videos. Who we actually are is our beings, which is really the absolute, and um, what we call our individuated being, which is often referred to as a higher self, our spirit. And we also have our qualities of our essence, which is really all of this is embodied, but qualities of our essence are things like a warmth, our sense of peace, our sense of joy, passion, love. All of these are really qualities of our being. It's really we spirituality is not something out there. It's actually our humanness. So, what is ego in the context of all of this? Because sometimes there's confusion depending on what tradition you've been studying, or um, I don't know. Sometimes I hear people are kind of confused about ego, and I think part of it is because sometimes spiritual teachings say kill the ego, kill the ego, and so we don't really know what we're trying to um, what it is, because sometimes the ego comes out in this really strong way, and sometimes it's subtle. It's really subtle. So let's talk about it a little bit. So, we live in a world, again, back up a little bit. We live in a world where, as a whole, especially where the world is going to, as a whole, we're developing more and more of our ego structures. And part of it is that as we need to develop a more sophisticated ego structure to manage and deal with the technology and the complications of life, we kind of need to develop a more complex ego structure. But really, what an ego is, and we can talk about the healthy part of our ego, which is the part that, organizes us, that really, it keeps us on track, um, gets us to drive in a way that's safe, or cook food and feed ourselves in a non-erratic way, in a in a way that's good for us. So these are things that a healthy ego does. Here is the thing that I really want to come across. Our egos, every time we lost every time we lost connection with our beings, with our spirit, with qualities of our being, the ego got formed. Piece of the ego got formed. So, for example, say you were a child and you were in bursts of joy. You had so much joy. It was the embodied experience of joy. And the people around us, because we live in a planet where it's very difficult to be human, we have all lost connection to different extent with our real selves. So when we were, say, a child and we had bursts of joy, embodied bursts that could really fill up the whole area that we were in, we have experienced, say that child experienced being around others who weren't open to that. They weren't embodying it. And because they weren't embodying it, they couldn't tolerate it. And because they couldn't tolerate it, they found some way to shut it down. And it could be really like, oh yeah, they shut it down because they got mad when I was in a really joyful place, or they shut it down because they didn't mirror our joy, or they shut it down because they ignored it, or they shut it down. It could be really like, yeah, I really saw how they shut down my joy. Or it could be it was subtle. It was really subtle and we didn't even detect it. When joy shut down, or piece of that joy, because oftentimes when we lose access to qualities of our being, or ourselves, each time we lost pieces, there was a piece of the joy that got cut off. It wasn't all of it was gone. For some of us, we had an event and all of it was gone. But for most of us, we experienced this over and over and over. And so it leaked out. It slowly started to shut down. And when something starts to shut down, when we start to lose access to any, even a small piece of it, the ego comes in and forms. It's the ego structure that resides in our bodies, and it could be, share a little bit more, it could be in the form of tensions, it could be negative essential states. And negative essential states are like qualities of a being, our embodied experience. The body is filled with warmth, with I'm trying to think of like energy. It's filled with softness. It's, we have a lot of yumminess in our bodies. And negative essential states are also in our bodies, and they are lead, something that makes us very sleepy, makes our consciousness difficult to access. It could be tensions, it could be rubber, there's steel. We have a lot of negative essential states in our bodies as well. So, coming back to the point, the ego then formulates itself in the body as programs, as states, as it's like a structure. That's why they call it an ego structure. If you have been around, studied psychology, they call it an ego structure, or spirituality, they call it an ego structure. It's in the body. It's a structure that formulates itself over and over. So, for example, I go to an amazing retreat, I open up to the absolute, I feel really incredible, I feel light, open, really delicious emptiness in my body. I wake up the next day, woof, I can feel like, okay, my ego has formulated itself back to what it was in the body. Sometimes it formulates itself back the way that it was. sometimes it formulates itself with a vengeance. If I've opened up, sometimes the ego becomes, if I haven't been able to do my work, the ego becomes um, even more and more stronger. It takes a stronger root in the body. So, when we have experiences that really kind of blow us apart in a really beautiful, good way, when we really have states or high experiences, peak experiences, let's say, or high experiences, the ego can, many times, unless we've worked through a lot of the issues that will arise, it will come back into the body, and it will come back in a stronger way. So we wake up and have this beautiful experience, and then the ego reformulates itself in the body. It can happen the next day. Many of us, it can happen slowly. We go to a retreat, we open up so much, we come back into life, and slowly, we're reformulating back into our ego as it was. It doesn't mean that the retreat was a failure. You know, it's like beautiful to have that experience, to have that opening. And then if we're able to integrate everything that are, integrate the things that are coming up, then great. And also, we have the experience once, we know what's possible. The integration work is really important to do. Many of us, if we are on a spiritual path and we don't have those kinds of high experiences, our ego starts to become more and more transparent with time, which is really, really beautiful. It can become more and more transparent because we're accessing more and more of our real selves. But it can also become more and more subtle unless we do the integration work. There's no way to bypass it. There's just no way that I know of that we can bypass the integration work. Because what happens is that what we don't approve of, what we don't look at, it sinks into our bodies. This is the important part that I wanted to talk about the ego, which is, as I had mentioned, every time we lose an aspect, of quality, or a piece of our real selves, the ego gets formulated. So what the ego is actually doing, it is holding the place for your real self. I think this is really important because sometimes the ego can be the key to returning to our real selves. It's holding it. It's like, all right, I lost this. Let me hold on right here, somewhere in my body. And it's mimicking. Oftentimes it's difficult because it's mimicking the real quality, the real aspect of ourselves, or it's the opposite of the realness of ourselves. So it's really tricky. It can be really, really hard to detect. The work is so beautiful. It's really so beautiful to be cultivating this, to be cultivating our real selves, to really be investing in who we are, because the world really needs this. We really need this. We need this ourselves, and the world needs this. It's so beautiful. But the journey is also can be so tricky, because we oftentimes mistake our ego for the real thing, especially when it's mimicking what's real. And it thinks it's real. the ego believes it's real, and what it's mimicking, it believes it's actually mimicking the real thing when it's not. It cannot. It does not have that capacity. Our egos can mimic our spirits. Some of us are more inclined to have our egos really mimic our spirit, our higher selves. And we think, oh, this is it. This is it. I'm my real self. I'm living my soul. I'm living this. When in reality, we may have some access to a spirit, some access to our higher selves, but really it's the ego that has co-opted that. And that's the tricky part of the journey, is that we're afraid to let go. We're afraid to let go of our ego, because what happens when we let go is that we enter a void. I think it's a void or something. It's like we enter a hole, a void. And some part of us doesn't trust that when we let go, that yes, we may be in the void, that something real is wanting to come to birth. It's wanting to come alive within our bodies. So I hope this video was helpful, because sometimes really we don't know what to do with our egos. We really don't know. We want to deny it. We want to make it more subtle. We want to most of us, we don't see it. We just don't, it's sneaky in that way. We don't see it. It mimics our real selves, or it's the opposite of our real selves, but we're not conscious of how our ego is kind of living when it's actually a dead structure. Our egos are a dead structure. There's no aliveness to them, but we're living them. They're living from our egos. And I'm speaking this as somebody who's been really deeply been doing my inner work for a couple of decades, more than a couple of decades. And still, it's insidious. The ego is insidious. And it's holding the key. It's holding the place for your real self. It's holding it. Oh, I just, the teachings that I have been studying, it really calls the ego the maddened lover. It's the maddened lover holding the key, saying, oh, I really want to be a servant to who you really are, to who I really am. I really want to be the ego. I really want to be a servant to who I really am, to my spirit, to my higher self, to my being. I want that. I just don't know how to, because I became the master. I started to believe I'm the master. Subtle. Really subtle. Hard to see. All right, please let me know your responses, your reactions. I'd love to talk more about this, about the transformation. We don't kill the ego, we transform it. So we transform the ego, we retrieve qualities of our essence, so our ego doesn't have to hold it anymore. All right, thank you for being here.